The sun was warm on her shoulders, a gentle, everyday kind of warmth that she loved. It was the kind of warmth that made you feel glad to be alive. It coaxed the scent of hot asphalt and blooming window boxes from the city air. But today, Ilara barely noticed it. Her mind was on a mission. A small, secret mission tucked away in the folds of her simple linen dress. It was his birthday next week. Not just his birthday, but a big one. The kind that ends in a 0 and makes people pause and take stock. Her husband, Leo, was not a man who cared for such things. He was the kind of person who'd rather spend a quiet evening with her, eating pizza and watching an old black and white film than throw a lavish party. His world had changed so drastically in the last few years, but he had not. The money, the fame, the constant demands, they were like a loud, unwelcome neighbor he tried his best to ignore. Their home was their sanctuary, a place where he could just be Leo. The man who still forgot to take out the trash and who could burn toast like nobody's business. And she loved him for it. So when it came to gifts, Ilara always struggled. He didn't want more gadgets or another expensive watch. What could you possibly give a man who could buy anything in the world? The answer, she had decided, was something he couldn't buy. Something personal, something that came only from her. That's where the idea for the pocket square had started. A few weeks ago, she had been idly flicking through a glossy magazine in a doctor's waiting room, a publication she would normally never touch. It felt like another world, filled with sleek, unsmiling people and objects that cost more than her childhood home. But then she saw it. A tiny photograph, no bigger than a postage stamp, of a man's suit jacket. Peeking from the breast pocket was a pocket square. It wasn't a loud, flashy pattern. It was a deep, sapphire blue, but woven into the silk was a subtle, geometric pattern. It's almost invisible, unless the light caught it just right. It was elegant and understated, and she knew, with a certainty that warmed her, that he would love it. It had his kind of quiet confidence. After some discreet searching, she discovered it was from a place called Atelier Luxe. The name alone made her nervous. It sounded intimidating, like a secret club for people who understood a language of luxury she had never been taught. She'd saved up her own money from the freelance graphic design work she did, not because Leo would mind paying, but because this gift had to be from her, not his credit card. It had taken her 3 months to save the amount she knew the small square of silk would cost. And today was the day she was going to buy it. Taking a deep breath, she stood before the boutique. It wasn't like the other stores on the street, which shouted their wares with colorful signs and open doors. Atelier Luxe was a fortress of understatement. The window was a single vast pane of flawless glass. Inside, on a simple white plinth, sat a single leather handbag, as if it were a piece of sculpture. There were no prices, no logos, no sale signs. Just the handbag, under a single spotlight. It was beautiful, but it was cold. It felt like it was daring her to come inside. Ilara smoothed down the front of her dress. A simple, oatmeal-colored linen thing she'd owned for years and loved for its comfort. She looked down at her worn leather tote, the strap softened and darkened by years of use. A sudden wave of self-consciousness washed over her. She felt like an imposter. But then she pictured Leo's face, the way his eyes crinkled when he was truly happy about something. She pushed the heavy glass door, which swung open with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and stepped inside. The first thing that hit her was the air. It wasn't just air-conditioned. It was curated. It smelled of something cool and clean. It's like ozone and a hint of some flower she couldn't name, something that probably didn't grow in any normal garden. The second thing was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, watchful silence, the kind you feel in a library or a museum, where every sound you make seems magnified and wrong. The floor was polished to a mirror sheen, a dark gray stone that reflected the track lighting recessed into the ceiling. The clothes were few and far between, hanging on racks that looked more like minimalist art installations than displays. They were all in shades of black, white, and gray. There were 2 women working there. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their high heels making a soft, rhythmic click-clack on the stone floor. They were dressed entirely in black, their hair pulled back severely from their faces. They didn't smile. They didn't greet her. They simply noticed her. Ilara felt their eyes sweep over her, a slow upward glance that took in her dress, her bag, her simple flats. She felt a hot blush start to creep up her neck. She suddenly felt as if she'd tracked mud onto a pristine, white carpet. She forced a polite smile onto her face and approached the nearer woman. A sharp-faced blonde whose expression was one of mild, professional boredom. "Excuse me," Ilara began, her voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet space. "I was hoping you could help me. I'm looking for a pocket square." The woman's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She let the silence hang for a beat too long before answering. "Pocket squares are with our accessories. Over there." She gestured with a flick of her head towards a far corner of the store, not making any move to lead her there. "Thank you," Ilara said, trying to keep her voice steady. She walked over, feeling the woman's gaze on her back the entire time. In the corner was a glass case, almost invisible against the wall. Inside, arranged on black velvet, were a collection of ties and a few folded pocket squares. And there it was. The sapphire blue with the faint shimmering pattern. It was even more beautiful in person. It was like holding a piece of the night sky. She turned back to the sales associate, who was now pretending to straighten a rack of identical gray sweaters. "Could I possibly see this one? The blue one?" The woman let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. It was the sigh of someone who was being greatly inconvenienced. She walked over, her movements stiff, and unlocked the case with a small silver key. She took out the pocket square, not with care, but as if she were handling a piece of dirty laundry, placed it on the glass counter between them. "This is from our private collection. It's 100% silk, hand-stitched." "It's beautiful," Ilara breathed, her fingers itching to touch the fine fabric. "This is the one I was looking for." The associate looked at her, a flicker of something cynical in her eyes. "It's $1,200. Ilara had known the price, but hearing it said out loud, in that clipped, almost judgmental tone, still made her flinch. She reached into her tote and pulled out the worn envelope she kept her savings in. "That's fine," she said quietly, her voice soft. "I have the money." The woman glanced at the envelope, then back at Ilara's face. A look of pure disdain crossed her features before she quickly masked it. It was a look that said everything. "You? With that envelope? You don't belong here." Before the associate could say anything else, another voice cut through the silence. "Is there a problem here, Celine?" A man had emerged from the back of the store. He was older, with silver hair styled perfectly, and a suit that probably cost more than Ilara's car. He held a tablet in his hand and moved with an air of absolute authority. This was the manager. Celine straightened up instantly. "No, Mr. Dubois," she said, her tone suddenly deferential. "This young lady was just asking about an item." The manager, Mr. Dubois, turned his gaze on Ilara. His eyes were a cold, pale blue, and they assessed her with the same thorough, dismissive inspection as Celine had. He didn't see a person. He saw a data point, and her data was clearly not up to standard. "Madame," he began, his voice smooth and condescending, like honey laced with poison. "I must ask, are you quite certain this is the right establishment for you? Our pieces are curated for a very specific clientele. We find it helps to manage expectations." Ilara felt her throat go dry. "I just wanted to buy the pocket square," she stammered, feeling small and foolish. Her carefully prepared speech, her joyful plan for Leo's gift, it all evaporated under the weight of his gaze. Mr. Dubois picked up the square of silk, holding it by its corner between his thumb and forefinger. "This item, for example. It is not merely a product. It is a statement. It requires a certain context to be truly appreciated, an understanding of the world it belongs to." He looked her up and down one last time, a final, dismissive sweep. "I do not believe you possess that context. In fact, I believe your presence here is making our other clients." He gestured vaguely to the empty store, uncomfortable. The humiliation was so sharp and absolute, it felt like a physical blow. The heat in her cheeks was now afire. Her eyes began to sting. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even breathe properly. She just stood there, mute and mortified, as the entire world seemed to shrink to this single, awful moment. "I think it would be best for everyone if you left," Mr. Dubois said, his tone final. He wasn't asking. He was telling. He placed the pocket square back on the velvet, as if it were too precious for her to even be near. Elara didn't remember walking to the door. She didn't remember hearing the soft hiss as it opened and closed behind her. But suddenly she was standing on the bustling pavement again, the noise and warmth of the real city rushing back to greet her. The contrast was so stark it made her dizzy. She leaned against the cool glass of the storefront, hidden from the view of those inside, finally took a deep, shuddering breath. The humiliation was a bitter taste in her mouth, a heavy weight in her chest. The worst part wasn't being thrown out. It was that they had made her feel like she was worthless. They had looked right past her heart, her intentions, her love for Leo, and seen only the price of her dress. And in their eyes, she'd been found wanting. She closed her own eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall, and felt utterly, completely alone. Asterisk the moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind her. The world came rushing back in a dizzying wave of sound and light. The city's orchestra of blaring horns, chattering tourists, and the distant wail of a siren felt like a physical assault after the mausoleum-like silence of the boutique. The sun, which had felt so friendly just minutes before, now seemed uncomfortably bright, exposing her to the world. Elara stood frozen on the pavement, her back pressed against the cool, smooth glass, feeling the phantom eyes of the sales associates still boring into her. The humiliation was a living thing inside her, a hot, tight knot in her chest that made it hard to breathe. It wasn't just the sting of being thrown out. It was the way they had looked at her, the casual, effortless dismissal of her entire being. They hadn't just seen her clothes. They had seen her soul and found it wanting. She couldn't go home. The thought of their quiet, beautiful apartment, the place she and Leo had built together, felt wrong right now. She couldn't bring this poison, this feeling of being cheap and insignificant, back into their sanctuary. So she started walking. She had no destination, no purpose other than to put one foot in front of the other, to move away from the scene of her degradation. Her feet carried her down the street, past the bright, cheerful storefronts with their welcome signs and friendly mannequins. They felt like they were part of a different planet, a world where people smiled and didn't judge each other on the sheen of their leather goods. She walked for a long time, the city a blur of motion and color. Every reflection in a shop window she passed showed the same thing. A small, wilted-looking woman in a simple dress, her shoulders slumped, her eyes downcast. She looked away, not wanting to see herself. They were right, a nasty little voice whispered in her head. You don't belong there. You're a fraud. You're just a girl from a normal town who got lucky. Who do you think you are, walking into a place like that? The voice sounded suspiciously like the manager, Mr. Dubois, with his smooth, venomous tone. She tried to shake it off, to tell herself it wasn't true. But the words had lodged themselves under her skin. As she walked, the city began to slowly seep back into her consciousness. She noticed the flower seller on the corner, arranging his bright pink and yellow carnations with gentle care. She saw a mother crouching down to tie her little boy's shoelace, her expression full of love. She heard a burst of laughter from a group of teenagers sharing a joke. These were the moments that made up a real life. These were the things that had value. So why did the cold, empty words of a couple of salespeople feel like they had the power to cancel all of it out? Her thoughts, as they often did when she was troubled, began to drift towards Leo. She pictured him now, probably hunched over his laptop in his study, his brow furrowed in concentration as he stared at lines of code. She pictured the way he'd push his glasses up his nose when he was thinking, the way he'd tap his fingers on his thigh to some silent rhythm. But then her mind pushed further back, past the private jets and the board meetings, to a time when the most expensive thing he owned was a second-hand guitar. She remembered meeting him in a university coffee shop, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and desperation during exam week. He was wearing a faded green hoodie with a hole in the sleeve, and his hair was a messy tumble of curls. He'd been trying to explain a complicated programming concept to his friend. His eyes lit up with a passion so intense it was captivating. She'd been sketching in a notebook, and when she looked up, his eyes met hers. He'd smiled then, a lopsided, slightly shy smile that made her heart do a funny little flip. He hadn't been a future billionaire. He was just a boy in a hoodie who was brilliant and kind, who loved bad sci-fi, movies, and could talk for hours about the correct way to brew a cup of tea. Their dates weren't 2 five-star restaurants. They were walks in the park, picnics of cheap sandwiches on a shared library book, an evening spent in his tiny dorm room, surrounded by stacks of books and the comforting smell of old paper. His wealth, when it came, was like a tidal wave. It changed everything about their lives on the outside. It gave them security, freedom, and a home that was a work of art. But he fought and fought hard. To keep it from changing them on the inside, money is a tool. Elara, he had told her one night early on, after they'd sold his first company for a figure that made her head spin, it's a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to hit someone over the head. It has no character of its own. We give it its character. Don't ever let it be the one that defines you. He had sold his first flashy sports car and bought a sensible, reliable sedan. He refused to move into a penthouse, choosing instead a beautiful apartment in a quiet building with a garden. He insisted on doing the grocery shopping and cooking dinner 3 nights a week. He was still just Leo, a man who was happiest when he was creating something. And when he was with her? Remembering this, the tight knot in her chest began to loosen. The cruel words of Mr. Dubois started to lose their power. His world was a world of price tags and appearances. It was a world of things, not of people. It was a sterile, empty place. And in that moment, she realized she didn't want to belong there, even if she could afford everything in it. Her value wasn't determined by the label on her dress or the thickness of her wallet. Her value was in the way Leo's hand found hers in the dark. It was in the shared memories of laughter and hardship. It was in the simple, profound truth that they loved each other for who they were. Not what they had by the time she found a park bench and sat down. The burning shame had cooled, leaving behind a quiet sadness and a renewed sense of self. She looked down at her worn leather tote, lying beside her on the bench. She remembered buying it in a little market in a small town in Italy on their first real trip together. It had been scuffed by cobblestone streets and sun-warmed on 100 different afternoons. It wasn't a status symbol. It was a memory box. Her simple linen dress was the one he had complimented her on just last week, telling her the color of it made her eyes shine. These things weren't liabilities. They were the fabric of her life, a life that was rich and full and real. She sat there for a long time, just watching the world go by. The park was a symphony of life, children shouting as they chased pigeons, an old man feeding breadcrumbs to a squirrel, a young couple lying on the grass, their heads close together, whispering. This was real. This was what mattered. The boutique, the people, the judgment, it was all just noise. The hurt was still there, a tender bruise, but it no longer defined her. She was Elara. She was a graphic designer, a lover of old books. It's a woman who knew the exact way her husband liked his tea. She was loved. And that was worth more than all the silk in the world. A deep sense of longing washed over her. Not for revenge or vindication, but for connection. She wanted to hear his voice. She wanted to be reminded, not just in her memories, but in real time, of the world they had built together. Reaching into her tote, past the envelope with the cash that now felt useless, she pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over his name. She wasn't calling to complain, not really. She was calling home. Her thumb felt clumsy as it hovered over his name on the screen. Part of her resisted the impulse. It felt like a failure, like running to tattle. She was a grown woman. She should be able to handle a few snide remarks without needing her husband to fix it. But the deeper, more honest part of her knew this wasn't about fixing something. It was about feeling untethered, like she'd been cast out of a world she didn't even want to be in. And she needed the anchor of his voice to pull her back to shore. She needed to be reminded of what was real. She took a shaky breath and pressed the screen. It only rang twice before he answered. "Hey you," he said. And the sound of his voice was like a warm blanket thrown around her shoulders. It was rich and familiar, a little distracted, but instantly comforting. She could hear the faint, rhythmic tapping of his fingers on a keyboard in the background. He was working. "Everything okay? You sound a little far away." Alara leaned back against the cool wood of the park bench, trying to arrange her thoughts into a coherent sentence. "I'm okay," she started, but her voice betrayed her, coming out a little too thin, a little too wobbly. "I'm just sitting in the park." There was a pause in the keyboard tapping. "The park by the gallery? Or the one with the crazy squirrel who tried to steal your croissant last spring?" A small, watery smile touched her lips. "The gallery one. The croissant stealer is on the other side of town." He laughed softly, a low, genuine sound that made something in her chest relax. "Good. I didn't want to have to stage a rescue mission. What are you up to? Don't tell me you're sketching pigeons again." "I still say that one you drew looked more like a grumpy old man." "I was not," she protested, her voice a little stronger now. "It was an architectural study. The man just happened to be sitting in front of the architecture." She was stalling, and she knew it. The memory of the boutique was still there, a bitter pill lodged in her throat. How could she even begin to explain it without sounding petty, or worse, like the gold digger they must have assumed she was? So she began, trying to sound casual. "I went to that really fancy store today. The one on Fifth Avenue." "Oh yeah." The tapping in the background stopped completely. His focus was entirely on her now, the one with the scary mannequins that look like they're judging your life choices. "What were you doing there?" "I was trying to get you something," she said, her voice dropping again. "For your birthday? I saw it in a magazine. It was just a little thing. A pocket square. A blue one with a pattern I thought you'd like." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a soft, thoughtful one. She could almost picture him there in his study, his brow furrowed, a small smile playing on his lips as he imagined her plotting this small secret mission. "That sounds incredibly sweet," he said, his voice warm. "You didn't have to do that. You know, my love language is you taking out the recycling." "I know," she said, a real smile forming now. "But I saw it, and I thought it was perfect. Anyway, when I went in," she trailed off, the words catching in her throat. The memory of Celine's bored sigh and Mr. Dubois's cold, dismissive eyes came flooding back. She felt that old, familiar heat of shame creep up her neck. "They weren't very nice," she finished, the understatement feeling pathetic. She braced herself for a question, for a demand for details. Instead, he just said, "Okay." It was a single word, but it was heavy with an unspoken promise to listen. He didn't push. He just opened the door and waited for her to walk through it. Taking a deep breath, she told him. She tried to keep her voice steady, to recount the events as if she were telling a story about someone else. She described the heavy door, the sterile silence, the way the woman looked at her dress. She tried to make her voice light and dismissive, but she could hear the tremor of hurt underneath. She told him about the pocket square, about pulling out her saved-up money, and the way the woman's face had changed. She left out the exact most cutting words. The part where Mr. Dubois had said she was making other clients uncomfortable, because she didn't want him to hear how much that had truly wounded her. It felt too raw, too vulnerable. When she finished, she just sat there, holding her breath, waiting for his reaction. She expected him to be angry on her behalf, to get that fierce, protective look in his eyes that she loved so much. But for a long moment, there was only silence. A long, chilling silence. The warmth had vanished from his voice, replaced by a stillness that was far more unnerving. "What is the name of the store?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice he used in high-stakes negotiations, the voice that signaled the end of a discussion and the beginning of a decree. "Leo." "It's really not a big deal," she said quickly, backpedaling. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted a war to be declared on her behalf. I wanted to tell you. I'm fine now, really. I was just a little shaken up. It was stupid. I'm over it." "The name of the store, Alara," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. She sighed, defeated. "Atelier Luxe." She heard him repeat the name to himself, a low, almost inaudible whisper. Atelier Luxe. It sounded like a curse. "I'm in a meeting," he said, his voice clipped. "A very important meeting." "I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called." "Don't you dare apologize," he cut in, his voice sharp with a sudden intensity. "Never apologize for telling me something that hurt you. Do you hear me? Never." A chill went down her spine. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry for her, but it was a cold, controlled fury. Like a wolf watching its pup being threatened. "I'm finishing my meeting," he continued, his voice returning to that flat, controlled tone. "I'll be done in 10 minutes. I want you to stay right where you are. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to get you." "Leo, no, that's ridiculous," she protested, her voice rising. "You don't need to do that. I can get a taxi. It's fine. I was just going to walk home anyway." "I am coming to get you," he said again. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, a command that was absolute. There was a finality in his voice that she knew better than to argue with. This was not a debate. "The conversation was over, okay?" she whispered. Feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. "I'll see you soon," he said. And then the line went dead. She sat there on the bench, the phone still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the pigeons pecking at the ground, at the children laughing on the swings, but she didn't really see them anymore. Her world had shrunk to the sound of his voice, the shift from warmth to ice and the quiet, a terrifying certainty that something was about to happen. She had wanted an anchor, but it felt like she had just unleashed a storm. The park bench, which had felt like a safe haven, now felt exposed and uncomfortable. Every minute that ticked by felt like an hour. The sun, which had been so pleasant, now seemed to be beating down on her, highlighting her anxiety. She had tried to go back to her quiet observation of the world around her, to the gentle rhythm of life in the park, but her mind was no longer there. It was with him. She pictured him in his meeting, his face a mask of professional calm, but his mind a whirlwind of cold fury. She felt a pang of regret. She hadn't wanted this. All she had wanted was to hear his voice, to feel the solid ground of his presence, not to set a fire. Exactly 61 minutes after she had hung up the phone, a large black SUV with darkly tinted windows pulled up to the curb. It was a subtle vehicle, the kind that blended into the flow of city traffic, but its presence was immense. It didn't shout for attention. It commanded it simply by existing. The traffic seemed to part around it, and pedestrians gave it a wide berth. It wasn't flashy, but it radiated an unmistakable aura of power and purpose. This wasn't just a car. It was a statement. The door opened, and Leo stepped out. He was not wearing the faded green hoodie of her memories. He was in a perfectly tailored navy suit, the kind of suit that moved with him, like a second skin. It was expensive, but not loud. It was a suit that said, "I am in charge here," without having to say a word. He hadn't even bothered to remove the tie. He looked every bit the billionaire titan. But his face was not the face of a man who had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. There was no triumph there. His expression was thunderous, a dark storm of controlled rage. His eyes, the eyes that usually crinkled with laughter and warmth, were scanning the park with a predatory intensity. Then they found her. The instant his gaze landed on her, the storm in his face subsided. The hardness in his jaw softened, and his shoulders, which had been squared with tension, seemed to relax. He didn't see the other people on the benches or the children on the swings. He only saw her. He strode towards her, his long legs eating up the distance, his whole being focused on her, as if she were the only person in the world. He didn't say a word until he was right in front of her. He just knelt down, so his eyes were level with hers, and took both of her hands in his. His were warm and strong, and they completely enveloped hers. "Hey," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. It was the voice she knew and loved, stripped of the chill from the phone call. "Are you okay?" The simple question, the genuine concern in his eyes, was the final crack in the dam she had been building since she'd walked out of the boutique. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She hadn't cried in the park, hadn't even let herself feel the full force of the humiliation until this very moment. He reached up with his thumb and gently wiped it away, his touch impossibly tender. I'm okay now, she whispered, and she meant it. Just seeing him there, so solid and so real, made the world feel right again. He gave her hands a final, firm squeeze, and then stood up, pulling her with him. He kept one of her hands tucked securely in his. Good, he said, his voice dropping back into that hard, flat tone. Then let's go get your pockets square. Elira's eyes widened. Leo, no. You don't have to. I don't want it anymore. Let's just go home. This isn't about the pocket square, he said, his gaze fixed on the street across from the park. This is about something else entirely. And we're not going home until it's finished. He didn't wait for her to agree. He just started walking, pulling her gently along beside him. His stride was purposeful, a man on a mission. She had no choice but to follow. They crossed the street, the crowds partying for them without anyone seeming to know why. They stopped in front of the heavy glass door of Atelier Luke's. It looked just as it had before, just as cold and unwelcoming. But this time, Alara was not alone. This time, she was holding the hand of a man who walked with the quiet confidence of a king returning to his castle. The door hissed open. The same two women were there, Celine and another, both looking impeccably bored. The moment they looked up and saw Leo, their expressions transformed in a flash. The bored disdain melted away, replaced by first confusion. Then dawning recognition, and finally, a look of hungry, sycophantic. They saw the suit, the aura. The man who was on the cover of business magazines. They were not sophisticated enough to read. Celine practically scurried forward. Mr. Sterling, welcome. It is an honor. We weren't expecting you. Leo ignored her completely. His eyes were already scanning the interior. Landing on the manager, Mr. Dubois, who had appeared from the back, his face paling as he recognized the man standing before him. Mr. Sterling, he stammered, straightening his jacket. Sir, what a surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure? Without a word, Leo led Alara to the corner where the glass case was. He pointed to the sapphire blue pocket square, still lying on the velvet. My wife, he said, his voice dangerously soft, came in earlier to buy this. She wanted to give it to me for my birthday. Mr. Dubois swallowed hard, his eyes darting from Leo to Alara, a look of dawning. Horrible understanding washing over his face. Yes, sir. There was a misunderstanding. Was there? Leo asked, turning his full attention to the manager. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. It didn't sound like a misunderstanding to me. It sounded like you judged my wife. It sounded like you humiliated her because of a perception of what she's worth. It sounded like you forgot your place, sir. Be quiet, Leo said, and the man's mouth snapped shut. He looked back at the pocket square. He picked it up, not with the contempt Celine had, but with a reverence for the object that almost made Alara feel like she was intruding on a private moment. He held it for a second, then turned and placed it gently in Elira's hand. For you, he said, his eyes softening for just a moment as he looked at her, because you see me. Then he turned back to the manager. The softness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something cold and hard and absolute. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't even look at the screen. He held it to his ear. It's me, he said to whoever was on the other end. Do you know the commercial building at 815 Fifth Avenue? The one that houses the Atelier looks boutique. There was a short pause. Good. I want you to acquire it. All of it. Not a lease, not a negotiation. I want the building. I don't care what it costs. I want the title transferred to my name by the end of the day. Alara's mouth fell open. She stared at him, completely dumbfounded. This was not a possibility that had ever entered her mind. It was too big, too insane. He listened for a moment, then continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Oh, and one more thing. When you have the building, you are to serve the tenants of Atelier Luxe with an eviction notice. Effective immediately. I want them gone by sunrise. The entire operation. Shut it down. Another pause. Yes, everyone. I want the lights turned off, the door locks changed. I want them to clear out every last silk scarf and overpriced handbag. By morning. Is that clear? He listened one last time. Good. He hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. The boutique was dead silent. Celine looked like she was about to faint. Mr. Dubois was ashen, his mouth agape, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. Leo looked at him, a look of profound disappointment in his eyes that was far more cutting than anger. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice low and steady. "You saw a woman in a simple dress, and you decided her value. You looked at her heart, and you saw only the price of her clothes. You trade in beautiful things, but you don't have the first clue what beauty actually is." He took Alara's hand again. "It comes in the form of kindness. It comes in the form of trying to find the perfect, quiet gift for the person you love. It's not in a $1,200 pocket square. It's in the thought behind it." He turned, pulling her towards the door. They had almost reached it when he stopped and looked back one last time. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "the funny thing is, I was going to offer you a partnership. I've been looking for a flagship retail space, but you can't build a beautiful house on a rotten foundation." He turned his back on them, a final, dismissive gesture that said they were no longer even worthy of his anger. He pushed open the heavy door, holding it for her as she stepped back out into the afternoon sun. The city seemed brighter now, the air warmer. He squeezed her hand. "Shall we go home?" he asked, his voice finally, truly his own again. Alara looked at the man beside her, the brilliant, fierce, loving man who had just purchased an entire building and evicted its occupants because they had hurt her feelings. She looked at the pocket square in her other hand, a symbol of the whole bizarre, hurtful, and ultimately incredible day. She was speechless, but for the first time all day, she didn't feel small. She felt loved. She nodded, and together they walked away from the boutique, leaving the silence and the sterile emptiness behind them. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet from the suffocating silence of the boutique. The city lights blurred past the darkened windows of the SUV, streaks of gold and white that painted the interior in soft, moving colors. Alara sat nestled against Leo, the pocket square of sapphire blue silk resting on her lap. It felt strange and heavy, not from its own negligible weight, but from the immense, absurd story it now held. She kept turning it over in her fingers, the smooth, cool silk a stark contrast to the fiery emotions of the afternoon. She felt a strange cocktail of feelings churning inside her, a lingering sting of the humiliation, a deep, satisfying hum of vindication, and a profound, unsettling awe at the sheer scale of what Leo had done. He hadn't just defended her. He had erased them. She finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." He didn't look away from the city sliding by. "Yes," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I did." He paused, then turned his head to look at her. His eyes were no longer stormy. They were clear and deep, full of the unwavering love she knew so well. "They attacked your dignity, Alara. That's the one thing in this world that is not for sale. It's the one thing I will always, always protect. But buying the whole building, evicting them by morning," she said, still trying to wrap her head around the reality of it. "It seems like too much. Like using a cannon to kill a fly." Smiled a little, a sad, tired smile. "They saw you as a fly. Something small and insignificant they could swat away for sport. I wanted them to understand that they were the ones who were small. I wanted them to understand that what they have, a little room full of expensive things and a snotty attitude, is just a rental property. And you are the foundation of my world. They don't get to touch that. Not ever." His words settled over her, not as a justification, but as an explanation. It wasn't about revenge or power for its own sake. It was a primal, protective act. It was a husband drawing a line in the sand and daring the universe to cross it. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the last of the tension finally draining out of her. "I love you," she murmured into the soft fabric of his suit jacket. "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. By the time they walked through the door of their apartment, the day already felt like a dream, something that had happened to other people. Their home was their anchor, a sprawling, light-filled space that was a testament to their shared taste, which leaned more towards comfortable sofas, overflowing bookshelves, and vibrant, abstract art than cold, minimalistic design. It was a place of life and warmth. Ilara drifted into the kitchen while Leo went to change out of his suit. She placed the pocket square on the dark granite kitchen island. It was so out of place there, next to a half-eaten apple and a pottery mug of pens. It was a perfect, beautiful, expensive thing that looked utterly lonely. It was the catalyst, the symbol of the day's drama. But in the quiet of their home, it looked like what it was, just a piece of cloth. Leo came back a few minutes later, having shed the suit for a pair of worn-in jeans and a soft, gray t-shirt that was one of his favorites. He was Leo again. He went to the kettle and started the familiar, comforting ritual of making them tea. The whistle of the kettle, the clink of ceramic mugs, the scent of chamomile and honey filling the air. These were the sounds and smells of their life. He handed her a steaming mug and leaned against the counter opposite her, looking at the small square of silk on the island. "So," he said, his voice gentle, "the infamous pocket square." "It's very beautiful," she said, tracing the pattern with her fingertip. "It is," he agreed, "but it's just a thing." "I know," she said. "That's what I was trying to tell myself in the park. I was so angry at first, and then I was just sad. I was sad that they could look at me and see nothing. And then I started thinking about us, about when we first met, about that old green hoodie of yours with the hole in the sleeve." She looked up at him, a soft smile on her face. "I think I liked that hoodie better than any suit you've ever owned." Dale laughed, a real warm laugh that filled the kitchen. "God, that thing. I think I left it at my mom's house years ago. She probably threw it out." "I hope she didn't," Ilara said. "I have a theory that it contains some kind of magic." "Magic, huh?" He took a sip of his tea. "What kind of magic?" "The kind of magic that lets a person see what's real," she said simply. "You could have all the money in the world, and you never lost that. You always saw me. But today, those people, they had nothing but beautiful things, and they couldn't see anything at all. They were blind." He set his mug down and walked around the island to stand beside her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "They're not blind," he said quietly. "They're just looking at the wrong things. They're taught to look at price tags and labels because it's easy. It's a shortcut. It means you don't have to do the hard work of actually getting to know someone, of seeing their heart. It's a lazy, sad way to live." He looked from the pocket square to her. "You, on the other hand, have always been a hard worker. In every sense of the word." He nudged her playfully. "You worked hard to save for this thing, just because you thought it would make me happy. You worked hard to get through art school. You work hard to make our home a place of peace. You work hard at being kind. That's the real work. That's the real magic. The money is just. It's noisy and it gets a lot of attention, but it's not the engine. You are." Tears pricked at her eyes again, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of hurt or shame. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and love. She turned in his arms and buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of him-clean laundry, a hint of coffee, and something that was just uniquely him. He held her, his hand stroking her hair, a steady, calming presence. After a moment, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice a little shaky, "when I was in that store, and Selena saleswoman was looking at me like I was a piece of dirt she'd scraped off her shoe for a second. For just a second, I believed her. For a second, I felt like she was right." His expression softened with a profound sadness. "Oh, Ilara." "No, it's okay," she said quickly, "because it taught me something. It showed me how easily a person's confidence can be broken. And it made me realize that all this," she gestured vaguely, meaning the money, the status, all of it. "It's a suit of armor, but it's also a target, and the person underneath. The person underneath is still just a person who can be hurt." Leo nodded slowly, his eyes full of understanding. "You're right. And that's why it's so important to know who you are when you take the armor off. When there are no labels, no price tags, no boutique doors. It's just you. And you, my love, are magnificent. He leaned down and kissed her. A slow, deliberate kiss that wasn't about passion, but about connection, about reaffirming everything they were to each other. When he pulled away, he picked up the pocket square from the counter. He looked at it for a moment, then he carefully folded it and tucked it into the breast pocket of his worn t-shirt, where it looked both ridiculous and perfect. "There," he said. "Now it's perfect." He looked at her, his eyes crinkling with the smile she adored. "But I have to be honest. My favorite gift this year isn't the pocket square. It's not." "Nope," he said. "My favorite gift is getting a phone call from the love of my life, hearing the hurt in her voice, and getting to spend $1 million to buy a building just to make her smile again." He grinned. "It was the most fun I've had all week." Ilara burst out laughing, a real heartfelt, tear-clearing laugh. The last of the day's shadows finally dissipated, replaced by the bright, familiar joy of their life together. "You're ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "I'm yours," he corrected. Later that evening, they curled up on their giant, comfy sofa, a fire crackling in the hearth. They weren't watching a movie or talking business. They were just sitting in comfortable silence, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. The pocket square was still in the pocket of his t-shirt, a forgotten flag of victory. The story of the boutique wasn't gone, but it had been put in its place. It was no longer a source of pain, but a story they would tell. A testament to the day he proved to her, in the most spectacular way imaginable, that her value was not something that could be appraised or priced or thrown out of a luxury store. It was, and always would be, priceless. And in the quiet warmth of their home, surrounded by the things that truly mattered, Ilara knew she was the richest woman in the world.